Okay, so let's get into this. We are heading back to the 8th century, right into the middle of a massive expanding empire. And we're landing in one very specific place, Basra. You have to picture this city in modern-day Iraq as like the New York or London of its day, a huge, booming port. It's crowded, it's noisy, and it's just swimming in wealth and ambition.
It was incredibly dynamic, but also, spiritually very complicated. And our deep dive today is really about this one single pivot point, a moment that completely reshaped how people understood their own faith.
And it all comes down to this one question.
Exactly. The question is, what happens when you stop worshiping out of fear or for a reward? What if it's just about unconditional love?
And what's so wild is that the person who forces this question isn't a caliph or some high-ranking scholar. It's a woman named Rābiʿa al-ʿAdawiyya, a freed slave with, zero formal status.
She never built a school, never wrote a definitive text, but she fundamentally redefined what spiritual sincerity meant. It's the ultimate story of influence without any formal power.
So our mission today for you is to get right to that initial spark of what we now call Sufism, this shift from just following rules to seeking a real emotional connection with the divine.
And to understand why Rabia's focus on love or mahaba is still so powerful today, it really shows you that these huge shifts in history, they often start very, very quietly, right at the margins.
To really get the sheer force of her message, we have to understand the world she was pushing against. Let's talk about Basra. You called it spiritually complicated. Our sources paint it as a city of paradox.
They do. I mean, just imagine walking through it, the noise, the crowds. It's a major international port. You have ships pulling in from India, from East Africa. They're loaded with spices, silks, gold.
So money is just pouring into the city.
Constantly. It's a place for merchants, for soldiers, for ambitious scholars, all looking for patrons. Fortunes are being made overnight.
That just sounds exhausting.
It was, and here's the paradox. On the surface, it's a very pious city. People are following the law, they're praying 5 times a day, they're fasting, all the boxes are ticked. But the sources we have show this deep, this spiritual void just beneath all that activity.
So they're doing everything right on the outside.
But feeling empty on the inside, a kind of spiritual burnout. People were rising in status, but, they felt like they were falling in meaning. That inner peace was just completely out of reach.
Which is such a timeless problem, isn't it? When faith becomes just a performance, a checklist, the heart kind of starves.
It absolutely does. And that's what was happening in Basra. They were looking for something that just more rules couldn't give them.
And it's that hunger that leads to the very first sort of tentative sparks of Sufism.
Right. And this is not an organized movement yet. It's just small groups of ascetics people focused on self-discipline meeting in quiet corners of the city, trying to find something more real.
So what were they focused on? What was the goal?
It was very practical at first. Things like intention, making sure every action you take is purely for God, not for show. They worked on cutting back their desires, getting rid of pride, and just trying to remember God in their ordinary hours, even in a chaotic marketplace.
Trying to find the signal in all that noise?
Precisely. And they started using poetry, not formal lectures, to express this deep longing for a connection they couldn't quite name yet. So they were sort of preparing the soil for this emotional turn, but their practice was still very much about discipline and, frankly, a fear of hypocrisy.
So the city is hungry for something new, but nobody expects it to come from Rābiʿa al-ʿAdawiyya, a woman on the literal and social edge of everything.
And her background is just so critical to her story. She wasn't from a famous scholarly family, no titles. Sources are clear she was once enslaved and then freed. She had no platform. Her message had to stand on its own spiritual truth.
And her entire life was a rejection of the materialism of Basra. Extreme simplicity. The sources talk about her eating very little, praying all through the night. She also famously refused to marry, which that was a huge deal for a woman in her position.
Every choice was about removing a distraction, the lack of possessions, the long vigils. It was all designed to channel her entire being toward one thing and one thing only. She wasn't looking for followers. She was just looking for God.
And she walks into these quiet ascetic circles, and she brings with her a question that it cuts through everything. She basically asks, why are you doing all of this? Is it because you're scared of hell? Or is it because you actually love God?
It's a spiritual bomb. It really is. Because up to that point, so much of religious life was framed by consequences. You obey to avoid punishment and earn paradise. Rābiʿa comes along and rejects both. She sees fear-based and reward-based worship as well as fundamentally selfish.
Wait, so even wanting to go to paradise is a problem?
From her point of view, yes. In terms of pure sincerity, if your motivation is an external award, even a heavenly one, your focus is still on yourself, on what you get out of the deal. To her, that kind of transactional faith was incomplete. The only truly honest motivation was mathabba, this pure, unconditional love.
I can just imagine how uncomfortable that must have been for the city's elite. The merchants, the scholars, their whole world is based on spiritual accounting. And she's basically saying, shred the spreadsheet.
Absolutely. It forces this really awkward moment of self-reflection. Are you praying because you have to or because you want to? And this whole idea is captured in her most famous prayer, a prayer that just sent shockwaves through the city.
Let's hear it. Because this really is the core of her entire philosophy.
She prayed, "If I worship you out of fear of the fire, burn me in it. If I worship you for paradise, deny me it. But if I worship you for your sake alone, do not withhold your beauty from me."
Wow. Just the spiritual courage in that. She's saying the consequences don't matter to me.
It's staggering. She's willing to give up the ultimate prize, paradise itself, just for the pure experience of God. It's the total centering of love as the only real goal.
And she didn't need to write a book.
Yeah.
That one prayer was enough to shift the entire conversation.
Exactly. She shaped a climate, not an institution. It started small, of course, a few people meeting with her, grappling with these ideas. But little by little, this word, mathabba, this idea of divine love, it starts to enter the vocabulary of Basra.
And that must have sparked some debate. I mean, it sounds beautiful, but I can see scholars worrying that, well, if it's all about love, does the law even matter anymore?
That was the core tension, and it was a healthy debate to have. Some did worry it sounded too bold, maybe even disrespectful, or that it would lead people to abandon the rules. But the genius of the Basran thinkers is that they didn't throw her idea out. They integrated it. They synthesized it.
So they found a way for love and law to work together.
Yes. They basically developed a framework with 3 essential forces driving a person's faith. And they weren't in competition. You needed all 3 for a balanced spiritual life.
Okay, so what were the 3?
First, you have fear or khawf. This was still seen as necessary. It provides discipline. It keeps you on the straight and narrow.
So the guardrails. The fear of consequences keeps you from, say, cheating in the marketplace.
Precisely. The second force was hope or raja. This is what keeps your spirit going. It prevents the despair that can come from too much fear. It's the belief in God's mercy.
Okay, fear and hope. And then Rābiʿa brings the third piece.
She brings love or ma'aba, and this was the key. Love is what makes the other 2 authentic. Fear and hope are about what happens to you. Love is about sincerity. It makes sure that your obedience isn't just mechanical, it refines your intention.
So the law is still vital, but Rābiʿa's message changes why you follow it. You're not just trying to avoid a punishment, you're doing it out of love for the one who gave the law.
It creates a devotion that's both disciplined and joyful. And, Basra was ready for this idea because of the work of earlier figures, especially Hassan al-Basri, who lived a couple of decades before her.
Right, he prepared the ground. What was his big contribution?
Hassan was the master of spiritual rigor. His whole thing was self-examination, sincerity, and holding yourself accountable. His followers were terrified of hypocrisy. They genuinely believed it was better to be a sinner who knows they're a sinner than a pious person who is secretly proud of it.
That's a powerful idea. Fearing the performance of piety more than actual sin.
Yes, he established this incredibly deep ethical foundation. So when Rābiʿa comes along with ma'aba, it felt like the natural final step.
It wasn't a contradiction, it was a refinement. Hassan gives you the ethical seriousness, and Rābiʿa gives you the emotional heart. So her discipline comes from a place of longing, not just panic.
That's it exactly. The sources say she wept often in her prayers. But these weren't tears of terror. They were tears of longing to be closer to the divine. It's a completely different emotional texture.
And this move towards such an intense personal love, it eventually needed new words, right? Later on, we see the term ish in Sufi poetry.
That's a great point. In Rābiʿa's time, the main word was mathabba, sincere, devoted love. But she lit the fuse. The emotional intensity she introduced eventually required a stronger word. Ish is more like a passionate, all-consuming love, the kind of love that makes you feel almost crazy.
The kind of longing you read in someone like Rumi.
Exactly. Rumi is standing on the emotional ground that Rābiʿa first cleared. She made the human heart the central arena for theology.
So this new spiritual energy, where did it grow? You said it wasn't in formal institutions.
It grew in people's homes. in what they called gathering houses. The early Sufis weren't building big lodges or anything. It was a decentralized, intimate movement.
So if you could step into one of those gatherings, what would you see?
You'd be in a simple courtyard, probably at dusk, and you wouldn't hear a formal lecture. You'd hear an old man talking quietly about facing death, or a woman sharing a story about patience.
So it's shared vulnerability, not just top-down teaching.
It was. The whole point was strengthening the heart. They'd share poetry, they'd reflect on the Quran, but it was all grounded in real, lived experience. And this network, carried by merchants and travelers, spread these Basran ideas of sincerity and love to other cities like Kufa and Baghdad.
And behind all this was an incredible amount of practical discipline. This wasn't just, abstract thinking. They were trying to achieve what they called a heart awake.
Oh, the practices were intense. Take nocturnal prayer. We're not talking about an extra 10 minutes before bed. This meant long, long hours of remembrance through the night, often on very little sleep. They believed that the silence of the night offered a clarity you just couldn't find during the day.
And you mentioned charity, too. How did they approach that?
It was radical. The goal wasn't to get a reward for giving, it was to break your own attachment to things. So they'd often give away almost everything they owned immediately. They also practiced committed silence, only speaking when necessary, to fight the ego that comes from constant chatter.
It's like a systematic dismantling of the self. And Rābiʿa's legacy is that the fuel for all that hard work was love, not just duty.
Her memory endured because she gave the whole tradition its emotional core. She centered it on this truth. God is not just a master to be obeyed, he is a beloved to be loved.
She becomes this silent foundation. When you read the great poets like Attar or Rumi centuries later, they are all drawing from the well that Rābiʿa first dug in Basra.
And crucially, her story proves that women were shaping Islamic spirituality from the very beginning. Not through institutional power, but through sheer moral authority. She's the ultimate symbol of sincerity over status.
So we've done this deep dive into this noisy 8th century city. What does Rābiʿa's story mean for us today, for you listening, in the middle of all our own noise?
I think Basra teaches us that real meaning often comes when you simplify, not when you add more to your plate. And Rābiʿa's life is this powerful reminder that your influence in the world doesn't depend on your job title or your platform. It depends on your sincerity, and that is available to every single one of us.
Her revolution, really, was to transform the goal of spiritual life, pushing it away from a transaction based on fear and ambition and toward one based on love and internal stillness.
And it leaves us with a question that is just as relevant now as it was then. If you took away all fear of punishment and all hope of reward from your own life, from your job, your faith, your motivations, what would be left? What would you still do?
The answer to that, it might just reshape how you move through the world.